Okay, hello everyone. This is your third final project choice. It's you performing a bias audit of a major media source. So it's going to challenge you to critically evaluate a major media source. You're going to identify a media source's biases and evaluate its reliability as a trustworthy source of information. And while left versus right political distinction is likely going to prove central in your analysis, you are also encouraged to develop more of a nuanced understanding of how various forms of bias can manifest itself in the media. Now, first things first, for selecting your media source. So there's literally thousands of popular media sources out there in the country that you could potentially choose. So I would like you to focus on a source that is arguably significant or noteworthy. And I've created a little methodology for you to identify a quote unquote significant resource. So these four organizations are all what you would call media research or media watchdog organizations. They report on the media. They're like media that covers the media. So the methodology I'm going to ask you to use is have either of these four media research organizations discussed the source that you're interested in investigating. Okay? So, again, this is going to be the standard for identifying a significant media source. So, the way you're going to do this is you're going to do the following Google search string. So, this is the important part of the search string. And then here in the carets, you're going to identify the media source that you're interested in investigating. So, right here is a great example of using NPR. So, if you wanted to do NPR for your report, you would do NPR and with Google, you don't need the and. Google recognizes white spaces as ands, but just to be clear, I have an and there. So again, this search string in Google, and you can see, sure enough, Columbia Journalism Review has discussed NPR, and the Pew Research Center has discussed NPR. So NPR would be fine for you to do for this project. So if you were to pick a source and none of these watchdogs or research organizations would discuss your source, that would be you wouldn't be able to use it for this project. Okay, so this information, like making sure that you select an appropriate media source, will be part of your project proposal. Now, from there, I am going to ask you to look at Wikipedia's definition of media bias. Okay, so this is kind of I abbreviated this a bit and summarized this a bit and condensed this. But this page right here is Wikipedia's page of all of the different types of media bias that you can encounter with a media source. Now, we haven't covered this in class. This is going to be upcoming in 2 or 3 weeks. But one of your labs is going to be about, I'm going to give you 2 or 3 dozen fake news articles, and you're going to be tasked with identifying the bias in those news articles. So this is similar to what you're going to be doing then for this project, except you're going to be looking at a real life source. Okay, so I'll have you read through some of these biases. They're pretty self-explanatory. Or many of them are self-explanatory, but again, you will have opportunity in your lab, like working directly with these types of bias. Now, this note's important. You do not have to cover every type of bias. Just focus on the few that best apply to the source you are investigating. Now, for your project, I'm going to ask that you identify at least 3 stories that support the type of bias or the type of perspective that you're trying to communicate that this source is representative of. Okay? Now, with one of, and you, Three is the minimum. You can focus on more than three stories, but I'm going to ask you to pick out at least three stories. One of these three stories I want to be quote unquote viral. I want it to be significant, influential, something that the internet discussed and talked about. So in addition, I have another kind of like algorithm for you to go through to identify a viral article that so one of your three stories has to be quote unquote viral. And the methodology I came up with is so this was a viral article in the New York Times a few years back, and its title is "Who is the Bad Art Friend?" So what I want you to do is put the title of this article in quotes in Reddit. Okay, so do the following search through Reddit's internal search function. Be sure to use quotes. Quotes means that it's phrase searching, so you're not looking for who and is and the and bad and art. You're making sure all of these words appear successively one after each other, so you will capture the actual title of the article. And you can see when I do this search, this article was discussed at least separately in 5 different subreddits. Okay, so I want you to find an article that was discussed in at least 5 different subreddits, and that'll fit our criteria as like this article went a little viral. Okay, so one of your 3 articles has to have gone viral. Now, there is going to be probably like a left versus politically right discussion. Do consider challenging like the nuances between left and right. Like there are certain sources that are like socially liberal, but they're economically conservative. In addition, there's some sources that are quote unquote right, but they have like certain right-leaning issues that they almost exclusively focus on. So for instance, like the New York Post almost focuses like exclusively on interests of crime and policing and public safety than it does instead of free market economics. All right, so make sure you do a little bit of that discussion when you're talking about the left versus right framing of your source. Now, once you've identified the bias in your source, I'm going to ask you to identify 2 competing sources that a reader could then turn to in order to balance out the bias of the source that you're investigating. So if you identify a conservative source, so if you focus on a conservative source, like suggest an alternative, reputable, liberal-leaning source or a centrist one. Similarly, liberal, suggest a conservative-leaning source. If your source is financially or commercially biased, suggest a source that has an independent funding model. If your source is sensationalist, suggest a source that's more academic or data-driven. Okay? So as you do this, you have flexibility to like consider like incorporating screenshots, UI documentation of the website. If you do, when you identify biased reporting, please try to take screenshots and annotate like explicit examples in the reporting or in the articles. Consider paying attention to headlines, how they're framed, what sources are cited, visual elements of the source, like how the source is presented. And then, finally, remember, bias is not necessarily intentional. Sometimes it can emerge from financial incentives, what the audience is expecting, or just some structural limitations within the enterprise of journalism itself. Okay? So the structure of your project, this is a recommended framework or a recommended like outline for your project. If you would do the paper or the presentation. If you want to deviate from this is fine. This is just like kind of some suggestions for you of how to handle this and how to get for you to get to like your page requirement or your presentation requirement. And then finally, for this project, I'm going to ask for that you cite in your paper 5 popular press resources from reputable news organizations or other journalism platforms or industry publications. But also consider using other media watchdogs beyond the 4 that I cited. So I'll let you Google media watchdogs and see what other groups are out there that keep their eye on the media. And consider citing some of those if they've done a discussion like documenting bias or a given ideological preference in a media source. And then finally, I'd like at least 2 chatbot queries, and you're going to be evaluated on whether or not your chatbot queries are appropriate for AI assistance. That means, are you asking your chatbot something that a chatbot can reasonably answer, or are you asking your chatbot a question, something that it could potentially hallucinate? Okay, that is project number 3.